This is Basket Case Clubs, CPR Group's podcast where we turn basket case clubs into showcase clubs. Hello everyone and welcome back to Basket Case Clubs. My name is Michael Connolly and it is my absolute pleasure to be your host on this little podcast of ours. And joining me as usual is my brother and partner in basket casey goodness. There you go. You got it out of me. Steve Connolly. Welcome, Steve.
I didn't even need to try to get that one out of you. I'm great.
It's just becoming bloody muscle memory now. Partner in basket casey goodness.
As it is for Jess. The good thing for her is that she can just copy and paste that little bit of the blurb for each episode.
Hey, Steve, I reckon we should put that on your business card. Steve Connolly, partner in basket casey goodness.
Probably better than what's there now. It's definitely more accurate.
Dumbass, pain in the ass. I don't know. What does it say there now? I can't remember. Oh man, I'm nasty. Hey, for our listeners,
That's
it's okay for me to say that because as you saw, I said that he's my brother. And for those who don't know, yes, he is the younger brother, so he cops all the shit from all of us.
But I'll always be the younger one.
Yes. So Steve, as you know, I like to call myself a bit of an armchair scientific skeptic. Now, skepticism and cynicism are often mixed up, and in my case, sometimes it's probably fairly justified. Cynicism is just where people like to hang shit on things because they're grumpy, but often it's just it can come with being once bitten, twice shy. So I'm cynical of a government decision because I've seen them make dumb decisions in the past, or cynical of any bureaucratic decision because I've seen them do dumb things in the past. Mm-hmm. But skepticism is actually more of a process-driven thing where it's, well, let's test this. Let's look at what evidence we've got and let's determine how sure we are of our hypotheses before we go saying, yes, this is absolutely right. So when somebody says to me, the earth is flat, I don't just say the earth is round. No, I do. I say, normally it's at that point in the conversation that I say, yes, you do. To talk to. Not to their face, I'll ask an interesting question like, oh, that's an interesting point of view to take, given where we are in the world. I mean,
your basket case.
Basket case of a person. But it's interesting, on what information have you based your decision to proceed with that hypothesis? And so that is more of taking a skeptical approach. So it's objective skepticism. Now, in my objective skeptical journey, I have come across things like causality does not mean, so correlation is not causation. And what I love about the topic that we're going to talk about today is that we're talking about casual vacancies, but if you just rearrange a couple of letters, you get causal vacancies. That I've always wondered why a vacancy on a management committee on a board, what's so bloody casual about it? Sometimes it's the most stressed I've seen people on committees is when they've got a vacancy and they've got to fill it. Like there's nothing freaking casual about what's going on here. I'm stressed, oh my God, we need to find somebody. I'm not feeling very casual at the moment. But it's always that funny link between causal and casual that just because you make one little spelling mistake and you can end up with a causal vacancy on a committee. I'm yet to see it in a constitution, or at least that I remember, but I'm sure that somebody's kind of made a little typo and the autocorrect didn't pick it up because it's actually a word.
I was going to say, you won't get the red squiggly line. You might get the green squiggly line for grammar, but you're not going to get a misspelt alert.
Yes, a causal vacancy. Yes. So what caused it? So sometimes vacancies occur on committees. The reasons that casual vacancies, why casual?
Casual
vacancies, casual vac, cas vac. So can we just call them vacancies?
Yep.
Is it casual because it occurs? This is probably something I should have looked up. Why is it called a casual vacancy? Actually, there's a book called Casual Vacancy by J.K. I think it's by J.K. Rowling. You can write in and tell us that I'm wrong if I've got that wrong. But it's about, so I can see Steve madly Googling there. It was an interesting premise and I really wanted to read the book when I'd found out about it, but still haven't got around to it. Anyway, we'll call them vacancies. There's probably a good reason they're called casual vacancies, possibly because they occur in between this typical time for standing down in elections. But the sorts of things that cause vacancies to occur can be everything from somebody kicking the bucket and actually being dead. And when you're dead, you're not allowed to be on a committee anymore. Although I have seen some people who are alive but act on a committee they're not bringing any more value than they would if they were dead. Through to somebody cracking the shits and saying, well, this is not for me anymore. I'm throwing in the towel and leaving. and everything in between, including things like getting busted for some indictable offence and therefore being ineligible to be a committee member anymore, doing something that is bad for the organisation, so perhaps not declaring a conflict of interest. You can refer back to our previous episode on conflicts of interest. And then, or not meeting their director's duties or their office holder duties and then being removed from office. So those are the sorts of things that can cause a vacancy. But I've seen, so both Steve and I have had some recent cases where we've seen casual vacancies on committees cause a bit of concern in their organisation. So we thought that it's topical because we've been dealing with it quite a bit over the last few weeks, but because then there are some missteps that we see clubs take that leads them down the Basket Casey road, we thought it might be a good idea to look at what can cause casual vacancies, and more importantly, look at how we deal with a casual vacancy when it arises. Steve, what sort of funny things have you seen happen?
Well, firstly, do you want to know what Wikipedia says about casual vacancies?
I don't know, but whatever
the term
it's
itself
going to be right.
Yeah, of course. Yes,
it's on the internet, man.
It's written on the internet. In politics, a casual vacancy, casual in the sense of by chance, is a situation in which a seat in a deliberative assembly becomes vacant during that assembly's term.
So I casually lost the coin toss. I casually lost at a game of poker.
Yeah, I don't. So yes, I'm exercising a degree of skepticism here as to the legitimacy of that interpretation of the word casual in the sense, especially because of the language.
It's on Wikipedia, so it's probably
someone's written it here. Yeah. So yes, look, I suppose the thing that comes to mind first is something that you touched on, which is the angst that casual vacancies often create. And partly that's a practical consideration in that the people who are left in the other positions typically need to, at least for a short time, pick up the slack and do the job of the person who's vacated the role or who wasn't elected at the AGM because, the process didn't lead to anyone sticking their hand up in the first place. So also then the concern about compliance and, we haven't filled this position or this position's become vacant. Do we need to shut down and stop running our club? So it's often a practical distraction in that people have to pick up the slack and do more work, but it's also a distraction from the strategy and operations of the organisation because people are worrying about whether they're operating in a compliant manner or need to, shut down just because some position or positions haven't been filled. And the reality is that there are some statutory positions in organisations that do need to be filled, some of which can be vacant for a determined period. And then, by the end of that period by which you have to have made an appointment or somehow gotten someone back into that position. But broadly speaking, simply having a casual vacancy in a management committee or board position doesn't necessarily mean that your organisation just needs to shut up shop and stop operating altogether.
So it's kind of the same sort of thing we talked about when we were talking about conflicts of interest, that sometimes the responses to conflicts of interest can be overcooked or undercooked. That's an overcooking it. Undercooking it is then not necessarily following a set process, and that process obviously is going to be in the Constitution to fill the casual vacancy the right way.
Yeah, the other thing also that I've experienced recently is, we've talked about this in the past, a fear of just having the kahunas to do the right thing, having the kahunas to make the decision that needs to be made. And I often kind of jokingly point to the survey of the Australian public that was completed in the lead up to the federal government making the decision as to whether same-sex marriage was going to be permitted.
The plebiscite.
The plebiscite. And whatever it was, $130 million, that's the figure that comes to mind. It was a lot of money that was invested, and, well, I say invested in bunny ears because I think it was a complete waste of money spent flippantly. We elect our federal representatives to make decisions on our behalf. Just because there's a difficult decision that is going to be political, don't cover your own backsides by letting other people make the decision. Have the kahunas to make the decision. So the same thing I have seen happen where casual vacancies arise, and a constitution very clearly provides the authority for the remaining board or committee members to make an appointment to fill that casual vacancy. Yet, because there's some political unrest, turmoil, whatever, people not liking other people, which is really what underpins all of those things in clubs, the remaining committee members say, no, we're going to have a by-election. We're going to go back to the members and ask them who they want to fill that position, which actually can create more problem. Often, I think, will create more problem than just having the kahunas to make the decision. And this particularly has happened recently in a golf club that consistently just goes back to the members on everything. And they've, over the course of a couple of decades of operating in this way, they've built a culture where the tail very much wags the dog. We've now got members who feel entitled to make decisions for which they're not accountable. The board are accountable, yet the members, because they're so used to being asked for their opinion on everything, including the recent casual vacancy in the position of captain, they feel as though they should be entitled to make that decision rather than the decision, albeit the case that the Constitution provides the power for the board to make that decision. The board are too scared to do so. So that's frustrating, but it also then means that in the Constitution, in their case, it provides a really clear process for online elections in the lead up to the AGM to determine who's going to fill the board positions that are up for election that year. However, because the process for filling a casual vacancy is stipulated as an appointment by the board, there's actually a bit of ambiguity there about how we run a by-election because the Constitution
doesn't account for it.
Yeah. So that led to some confusion and pretty much, if I was not a professional person, I might have said something like, I told you so. Which of course I didn't.
Yeah. How very unskeptical of you. So let me take a skeptical approach to this, Steve, given that that's where we started, and disagree, but I think I'm going to talk myself around to agreeing with you. You said that you don't necessarily think that it's worth involving members in a decision to appoint a casual vacancy, especially to have a by-election to fill a casual vacancy, especially if there's a reason for, authority for the board or committee to appoint somebody to fill that casual vacancy.
Yes. However, I'll qualify that by saying that these situations should always be considered on their merits and a case-by-case approach taken, whereby there may be a good reason to seek member input prior to a board making a decision. However, I think in most instances, seeking member input and then the board making the decision, if the board is given the authority to make that decision by virtue of the Constitution,
in this case,
yes, then I think that it should be a board decision informed by member input rather than saying to the members, we're too scared to make the decision, so you do it for us.
Yeah, so my thought when you were going through that was that there may be a good reason, and that's exactly what you said.
Absolutely.
However, now to flip back around again, even though there may be a good reason, and are the reasons really good enough, or are we just saying they're good enough because we have the ability to appoint someone? Let's just get to it and appoint them. But is it
recognizing that for the time where there's a vacancy, that role may not be being filled, the job may not be being done to the level that it should be to ensure the organisation's able to deliver.
Yeah, so you're delaying just by fart-assing around. You're delaying
exactly
making the right decision.
Yep.
But even if you do then go to the members, whether you're seeking their input or conducting another election at a special general meeting, or if you've got provision for doing elections outside of a meeting by doing that, is it the best use of that group's time? Seriously, if you're going to pull together a lot of heads for a discussion about something, is this the best thing to discuss? Is this the sort of thing that, and we talk about this when we talk about meetings, add up the charge out rate or the volunteer equivalent of a charge out rate for each of the people involved in that meeting, multiply that by the number of minutes or hours that they're there. Has that time added that dollar's worth of value to this organisation? The answer is probably no. Therefore, if you're going to get together like that, maybe a brainstorm about what's best for the future, about some opportunities for the club to explore further growth. There's going to be plenty of other things that are going to be more worthwhile getting that group of people's time together. Or just, here's a novel idea, just let them get about playing sport.
Yeah.
So here we go. This is, here's me doing my good preparation, Steve. Luckily, I have these books on hand. This is from Nick Renton's Guide for Meetings and Organisations, Volume 1. And for those of you who know us well, this is the green one. So you know that we have two Bibles. One's the green one, one's the red one. And that's Volume 1 and Volume 2 of Nick Renton's Guide for Meetings and Organisations. May Nick rest in peace. Casual vacancies can arise on a committee by death, See, he started where I started, Steve. By resignation or by removal from office. Depending on the rules, they can also arise in other ways. For example, when elected office bearers cease to be members of the organisation, that makes sense, or automatically when they become ineligible to hold office by virtue of, for instance, accepting a paid position within the organisation if the rules prohibit somebody who's in a staff role also sitting on the board or management committee.
Did you say death, resignation, or disqualification?
I didn't. Death, resignation, or removal of office, removal from office.
Right. Okay. Oh, there's that's
Is that
similarly.
in Wikipedia?
Yeah, Wikipedia says death, resignation, or disqualification. This is relating to parliamentary vacancies, so a little different from not-for-profit organisations.
So okay, see, in Parliament, I can see them being fairly casual about it. Whatevs, man.
But also interesting that neither, well, particularly Nick Renton, given his focus on not-for-profit organisations in those books,
Yep.
That we haven't had either Nick Renton or Wikipedia mention a failure to fill the position in the first instance, which is
right
what we see quite a bit in the not-for-profit space.
Yeah, yeah. So that's where you have an AGM, nobody sticks a hand up for a position, and everyone sits around for, well, typically it's somewhere between 24 and 112 minutes, saying, if we don't have somebody to fill this position, we're going to have to shut down. Come on, guys, somebody put their hands up. And then the outgoing person who used to fill that position says, honestly, it's really easy, and I promise that I'll be here to answer. And look, I'll hold your hand the whole way through.
And then they either end up sticking
right.
their hand up themselves and saying, oh, okay, I'll do it another year, which of course reinforces the reality that they're never going to stand down. So other people.
But it was still a choice.
It was always a choice.
They had a choice to say, oh, all right, I'll do it again.
Yep.
Or they could have said, I'm just going to the bar for a bit.
Mm.
Or maybe the tea and scones stall. I'm going to go and make scones for lunch when we're finished, Steve. Okay, so you have touched on the point that an organisation that experiences a casual vacancy, even if that casual vacancy is in one of the critical positions that is named to, in Queensland, the Office of Fair Trading, New South Wales, the Office of Fair Trading, Access Canberra and Canberra, Licensing NT, Department of Consumer Affairs, whoever it is, in the forms that you fill in. So one of the critical positions, which is typically President, Secretary, Treasurer, and where they exist, public officer. And the public officer isn't necessarily a management committee position either. But even if it's one of those positions, it doesn't automatically mean that you must stop operating. You will typically have a limited amount of time to fill those critical positions, but it doesn't mean you have to stop operating. Where you then have multiple other positions on a committee, so that sometimes these are called general committee members or just committee members. No, sorry, I shouldn't say just, because they are important because they are part of the decision-making body. Then sometimes you don't need to fill those positions. It would only be, say you had 9 on a committee, and if you've got 9 on a committee, you should probably have your head read, and you had 4 casual vacancies, then that would leave you a minimum, that would leave you 5 people still serving on that committee. Now, because 5 is more than half of 9 and would typically equal the quorum for a management committee meeting or a board meeting, then the committee can continue with those 4 casual vacancies until the next time you're going to have an election, which would typically be at or around your next AGM. But if the number falls below a quorum, then you've got to say, well, the only thing this committee can do now is fill the casual vacancies.
That's an interesting point that has arisen in some of the recent constitutions that we have written. So if an organisation's constitution specifies that the quorum for a management committee meeting is more than half of the members currently on the management committee, then the number can never drop below the number required for a quorum until you get to 1. So you need to be careful about the requirement to achieve a quorum for a management committee meeting. So in the model rules for Queensland associations, there's a provision that says the quorum for a management committee is more than half of the management committee members as at the end of the last general meeting. So for many, that'll be at the end of the AGM. Let's say you've got 7 people elected to positions. At the end of that general meeting, which is the AGM, you've got 7. So a quorum for a management committee, which comprises a total of 7 members, is more than half, so 4. And however, if the provision that relates the quorum to the number of management committee members as at the end of the last general meeting is removed, and we just say it's more than half of the committee, a quorum for a management committee meeting is more than half of the number of members currently on the management committee, then relating that to the number required, the number below which you need to either fill vacancies or call a general meeting becomes a little ambiguous. So there's
Wow, this took a really complicated step sideways very quickly, didn't it?
funny how that happens when we're talking
Yeah.
constitutions, quorums,
Yeah,
and
but
casual vacancies.
it's only by getting to run these scenarios that you can start to see why it's so important that
Yep.
somebody on the planet is considering this stuff. Steve, there's only you, me, and Nick, and he's dead. So it's only you and me. Now it's you, me,
Who's
and
pushing
Nick
up daisies?
and Wikipedia. So thank God for Wikipedia. So what our listeners won't know, because they don't get the joy of listening live like poor Jess does, is that Steve and I just had quite a considerable sidebar to get back into the recording then to say, holy crap, that's really interesting. And the other thing we discussed is, so let's say you've got, so I said 9, you said 7, let's go with 7. So we've got this 7, we've got 3 casual vacancies, so we've got 4. Because the shape and size of the management committee is something that can only be determined by the members, the management committee can't change itself. It needs the members, because that's a significant decision that we would need to call a general meeting to change. Because the management committee still is 7, then a quorum for the actual meeting is that all 4 of those people still there need to turn up. So again, that comes back to the wording. Is it the number of members currently on the management committee, or the number of members elected to the management committee, or the number that were there at the end of the last general meeting, was what it says. So if it's the number that was there at the end of the last general meeting, that was 7. Now we have another general meeting. Those 3 are casual vacancies. There's only 4. It's those people. So then a quorum would be based on 4, not 7. Wow, that got fun, didn't it? Ladies and gentlemen, if you've been able to follow along with that little part of the podcast, please write to us and we will be happy to send you a free chocolate bar. Right, so how to fill a casual vacancy then. So to go back to Renton, he's got 3 points in here, and none of these are going to be of surprise to you. The first one is by holding a by-election. The second one is by the committee, and I'm going to leave it there for the moment because I now want to, because the third one then I think is actually really a way to do the second one. So if you, in my opinion, and Steve, I'm going to go out on a limb here, and given your experience, going to suggest that you're going to agree with me on this one. In my humble opinion, I don't think it's worth the effort and again the time for community organisations, for typical community organisations, which, if let's say round figures, we've got 100,000 in the country, give or take, typical is probably going to be well over 95,000 of those. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's worth the time and effort that it would require to have a by-election, given that it's not necessarily going to lead to a different result. And even if it did lead to a different result, hopefully the management committee is on the ball, the board is on the ball enough to be able to say, we think we've got our fingers on the pulse. We think we know the sort of person that we need because we know the sorts of skills that we're recruiting for here. Let's just go and find that person one way or another. You're probably not going to it's not going to lead to a material difference. And if the members don't like who's appointed to the management committee, there is the power, and I even go so far as to say the obligation on them to make a change, to say, well, we don't like that person. We don't like the way that person's acting, and we don't like their ability to fill their duties as a board member or a committee member of this association. So we can call a general meeting to remove them from office. So they've got that power. And worst comes to worst, we can just wait till the next AGM and put somebody up to run against them. So they've still got that ability to have the members' control, as they're supposed to, because an incorporated association, a company limited by guarantee, is member-owned / member controlled, because we don't own shares, but it is ours. We are the people who get to make the significant decisions for the direction of this organisation. Mm. So that means that really, by appointment or co-option, to me, it makes sense, because we've got a casual vacancy. We know, like I said, we know what we need. Let's go and find that person who's going to bring the skill set that we're looking for to fill this casual vacancy, and to do it efficiently, because we can just do that. Constitutions, typically the model rules all around the country, give the authority to the management committee or the board to be able to make those appointments. Just like you said, avoid the plebiscite. Just go and make the decision.
Yep.
So the third one, I was
just going to add in there that the appointments to casual vacancies becomes appointment by the remaining board or committee members rather than election by the members at a general meeting or through some other election process becomes a little more interesting when the terms in office are longer than just 1 year as well, because if terms in office are 1 year, you have a resignation or a death, or you fail to fill a position, the appointment that's being made by the remaining committee or board members, should they choose to follow the constitution if it provides for it and they make an appointment, is only until the next AGM. And then the members are going to have that say, that the opportunity to have that say that you're talking about here.
To
But if the
confirm
terms
your appointment or overthrow it.
Correct, yeah. However, if the terms in office are 2 or 3 years or even longer, then what we'll often see is a desire from an organisation to say, okay, well, the committee or board can make an appointment. This is when we're constructing a constitution. The committee can make an appointment until the next AGM, and then we're going to call on the members to fill the position by election for the shortened remainder of their term. Or some organisations say, no, if a casual vacancy arises, the committee or board can just make the appointment for the rest of that term. And that might be for a 3-year term, we don't fill the position at the AGM. The board or committee are then making an appointment for the entire term.
Freeze, yeah.
And I think that's horses for courses. I think it depends on the nature of the organisation, depends on the size of the organisation. But again, I think
But this can also be where an organisation could hedge its bets, Steve, to say, if we make an appointment, sure, we're going to just do it, avoid the plebiscite, but we'd like that decision ratified at the next AGM. Typically, it gets ratified, but it does give the members a chance to have their say sooner than 2 or 3 years for those extended terms.
Yes. And that's probably what happens in the majority of cases. It's probably more organisations that go with that option than those that say we're just going to make an appointment for the remainder of the entire term.
You said in the majority of cases. Again, I'm going to go out on a limb here and say you'll probably agree with me on this one as well. I reckon in the majority of cases, the rest of the members are saying, thank God they picked somebody that isn't me.
That's a good point, yeah.
So you picked someone. Yes. Yeah, they said yes. Good. It's not me.
Yeah.
I get to sit here and keep looking at how nice my shoes are at the AGM, so I don't make eye contact with anyone and accidentally get president. Oh, so number 3 in Renton's book. So sorry, just to reiterate before I go through number 3, is what you're talking about there in those extended terms is either make the call that yes, you fill the remainder of the term. So even if somebody resigns in the first 6 months of a 2 or 3 year term, it's for the balance of the term, or is it until the next AGM, which then gives the members a chance to have if you like, a power of veto over the decision of the management committee or board to appoint somebody to that position.
Yes, and of course, as you said earlier, always go to the Constitution first.
Yes, I've just made a big note here on my pad in bold capital letters that I'm underlining now that says, read your Constitution. So if you want to know what the answer is here, read your Constitution. If you don't like what the answer says because you don't think it genuinely reflects the best reality for your organisation, guess what? You can change your Constitution. It's funny how often it turns out, Steve, that people don't know that they've got the power to do that. I thought it was in the Constitution. We couldn't change. Was it you telling me last week or somebody in the office telling me last week? Yeah, somebody had been in a meeting. It might be you. So if it wasn't you, then this is going to be interesting for you. They, in an inception meeting, said this is the first time we're really getting our discovery phase of our consulting work with them. They said, oh, yeah, there was lots in the Constitution that we didn't like, so we just wrote bylaws that do things differently. So, you know that bit in the Constitution that says bylaws must be consistent with the Constitution? Often it says not inconsistent with, so you've got the double negative, which may be for a legal reason. I'll leave that to the boffins.
It's probably to stop people doing exactly this.
So purely inconsistent, but they didn't like the Constitution, so they just wrote their own rules to go against it. And you can change it. We can what?
That is very interesting. No, it wasn't me.
Yes, okay. So there you go. So then this third point in Renton is less about how to fill the casual vacancy and more about how the committee or board might make the decision as to whom to pick to fill a casual vacancy. So here's number 3, is by re-examination of the ballot papers used in the last election. So it's a mechanical task not involving the exercise of any discretions. Candidates who were successful in the last election need to be approached and given a reasonable time to indicate their current willingness to serve. Long and short of it is, if we had a process where we had 3 positions and there were 7 nominations, and yes, I am picking this number because it's a recent case for me. There are 3 positions for which there were 7 nominations, so 7 candidates. then we had 3 successfully elected and 4 that were then the also rans. We've now had a casual vacancy on that board. The board, because this is a good idea, have decided, yes, okay, well, we'll now read. And we had the ballot papers because we had conducted an electronic election. So it was really easy to see, okay, so this person here came forth in the election. Wouldn't it be logical to offer them the position first and see if they're, and exactly as Renton says, if they're willing to serve, then give them an opportunity to take up the position for a job that they put their hand up and actually want. So they went through with an election. Some might say, suffered the humiliation of coming forth, so just being pipped at the post.
Yeah, they might say, stuff yes, you didn't want me then,
they
you
very
can't
well.
have me now. Yeah.
But then following on from here, then you can go to the person who came 5th, then 6th, then 7th. And it's only then that you might say, okay, well, let's now, and this is the other part of it, call for expressions of interest.
Yep.
So then the committee or board has, if there are multiple people who say, yeah, I'd actually be keen, then let's see what their skills are. We can give them the opportunity to write a short spiel about themselves and why they'd be great to fill the job, or even give them the opportunity to come and present their case to you in person. So to come and join that meeting of the management committee where we're going to make this decision about who to appoint.
I love that, expressions of interest. And this is probably taking us back to that discussion we were having a little earlier on about the board making the decision, but having that decision informed by the members. So there may well be someone out there in the general membership of the organisation that is ideally suited to this role. And unless you put the call out for expressions of interest, you might not find that out. So there's every chance that you'll get none. No one will come back to you. And you will need to, as a committee, go and do that shoulder tapping to ask people who you identify as potentially suitable to fill the role. But I do like the idea of going through that process of calling for expressions of interest. Now, all of this also depends on when in the term this happens. If you've failed to get anyone nominate through the AGM preparation process and the position is vacant, there's a casual vacancy because there was no one nominated, let alone elected to it, nominated for, let alone elected to it, then you might be inclined to veer away from the expression of interest process because you've just done that and no one stuck their hand up. But if you're halfway through a term or a year, then perhaps it makes more sense to put the call out.
So I just want to reflect a minute on your terminology there, tap someone on the shoulder. A lot of committees, in my experience, again, I'm going to presume that yours is similar. A lot of committees are reluctant to do that because they feel that, I don't know, that it's demeaning or that they're putting somebody under pressure. But if you don't, then nobody's, those people who might be sitting there waiting, those volunteers who say, I don't volunteer because I was never asked. It's always an option on surveys and it's always fairly highly represented in the data. This can be just the confidence boost that somebody needs to say, oh, I never realized you saw those skills that I believe in myself that I have, but I never realized that you guys saw them and that you would value them if I was to bring them to this committee. So it can be actually the most flattering experience that somebody could have, because they're being invited to a role that carries some importance, and you're paying them the respect of asking them. So please don't be afraid to ask. So that shoulder tapping is not a bad thing. It's actually a good thing, especially if you are genuinely able to identify in people the skills that, by doing a little skills assessment, a skills matrix, if you like, to look at what skills each of our board members has. And even before that, saying what are the sorts of skills that we want our board collectively to have, and then looking for gaps and then identifying in somebody those gaps able to be filled on your board, and saying, hey, we're contacting you because, and please, again, literally the shoulder tap is good because it indicates that you actually need to be near enough to somebody to tap them on the shoulder. So the in-person asking is always best because you can have a two-way discussion.
Yes.
Yeah. Like you say, Steve, horses for courses. So it's probably about time to look for some takeaways from this little journey of how to fill.
Already, how time flies when you're having fun.
Well, especially given that there was more time that flew because of our lengthy sidebar partway through, because of the rabbit holes that you find just by having these discussions. It's kind of like brainstorming. It's only because somebody says something that they wouldn't have otherwise said, because we've got the ability to just throw everything onto the table or the whiteboard. But then you say, oh, hang on a minute, let's have a look at that. So yes, that was definitely a hang on a minute, let's have a look at that moment. So number one is, just because you've got a casual vacancy does not mean that you have to shut down your organisation.
Although it can be a really good threat to get people to stick their hands up, it's typically not the right reason to have someone motivated to help.
It's no better than when you're standing on the sideline of a football match and you hear, if we don't get new people to come and volunteer at the canteen, we're going to have to shut the canteen. And you just watch everyone ignore it.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I said if we don't get anyone to store at the canteen, you're going to not be able to buy your food. Is that what you want? And I mean, what sort of culture does that portray for all of the visitors there on that game day? The same sort of thing is true here. If you've got somebody in mind and you know that they're going to be a good fit, by all means, don't be afraid to invite them.
Schmooze them.
Schmooze. Just make friends, for crying out loud. One of the other points, Steve, that I think is really important that's just come back to me is is the process to follow after you fill a casual vacancy. So yeah, we've got the process of finding someone, inviting them to the position, having them accept the position, and then putting them into play. There are actually some technicalities that are really important that be followed afterwards. Mm-hmm. Obviously, if it is in one of the positions that is nominated on a form to whatever the state or territory department is that looks after incorporated associations in your state or territory, you've got to make sure that you do that. So many people forget. So if you don't do that, if you don't literally fill in the change of details form and submit it, then should anything go wrong in your organisation, that person who has stood down in good faith is going to still be accountable for the actions of the person that follows. So I suppose this is also not a warning, that's probably a bit harsh, but something to be proactively aware of is that if you are that person who leaves a committee, don't just assume that you're off scot-free. And especially for those people who leave because they have had a gutful and the organisation is going in a way that they don't feel comfortable being on the committee to take it, then it's actually in your best interests to make sure that that change of details form is submitted. Because if then things happen, then they're still going to come looking for you. If there's a fine that needs to be levelled at the organisation for not meeting its statutory duties, hey, you're still the person on that form. So it's actually really important that you fill in and submit that form.
That is a really good point.
But then it goes further than that, because if I am, for instance, a signatory on a bank account, I need to be taken off that bank account. If I am an admin on the club's Facebook page, then that should be changed. So
especially if you're the only admin. How many times have you come across a club that, we've got a Facebook page there, but no one can access the administration portal because the person who set it up left.
Didn't
hand anything over.
Yep. If you've got access to the email accounts of the club, you'd need to surrender that when you go. So if you are on the remaining members of the committee, even if the person has left under good circumstances, they've been promoted and taken a job in Bali or Haiti, whatever, then great. That's good for them, but we've still got to remove them. We have a duty to remove them now from any of the correspondence, because that email account will be privy to private information to which they are no longer entitled, because they're no longer an office bearer of this association. But it's often a point that is overlooked, that we've got all of these registers, all of these sign-ins that do need to be changed. And don't think that password security is not important just because you're a not-for-profit club. We know of two clubs that come to mind. One was 39,000, one was only 19,000, one was only 5,000 that are ripped off just because somebody worked out the password, because it was not a secure password, to a club Gmail or something account, said, oh, hi, Barry, it's Paul here. Can you just go into the bank? And so, because they used the same passwords and everything, and they were able to go in and just by poor password security, steal money from clubs. And guess, by the way, how much of that money they got back?
Yeah. Zilch.
Nothing. Absolutely nothing. So, yeah, nice work, scammers, assholes. So yes, you don't need to shut down. You don't need to worry too much about it. There is a process for filling the casual vacancy in your constitution. You do just need to make sure that you follow that. If you don't like what that process is, if, for instance, you agree with Steve and with me that having a by-election is onerous and your constitution currently provides for a by-election, then go to the model rules, come to us, and we'll be able to help you through a change that means that you don't need to do that it gives you the authority to fill by appointment. The final thing that I want to add, Steve, and this is one that is often overlooked, is that every year your financial accounts, particularly when they are audited, should include from the auditor a list of all of the people who served on that committee or board for that financial year. So the last thing to update is, and this is something that I think not enough committees or boards actually have, is a rolling register of who's on the committee or board. So sure, we can go to the AGM minutes each year, but that doesn't tell us the details of who changed through the year. Because when you look at a good set of audited accounts, while we might only have 7 members of our board, there might be 14 or more mentioned on the who was on the board during this reporting period because of the changes that occurred in that time. So you'll see the date that somebody was elected and resigned, or the date that somebody was appointed and then resigned or was removed. So it's the start date and the finish date so that it shows who are the accountable people. Now, this is particularly important in the cases of charities, because the people on the board or management committee of a charity are responsible people. So there are duties of responsible people, but there are also eligibility criteria for responsible people. So it's really important from a charity reporting perspective that our responsible people are very clearly noted. And that's something, unfortunately, that is often overlooked. So right now, if you don't have a register of who is on the board or management committee, it's a simple thing to start. And I definitely think it's worthwhile, because if you keep that, it's like an asset register. It's a pain in the ass to set up when you first do it. But once it's there, it kind of gets its own inertia and it helps itself along. This is exactly the same. Set it up. It's really simple, especially if you're not too far from your AGM or there's been no changes since your last AGM. You can say all of these people took on the role at that point, and then it's just a place that you can go to very simply note who left and who arrived. So it's a simple spreadsheet will do that for you. So there you go, Steve. As usual, this has been a particularly interesting journey of basket casey goodness, because of the funny things that can go on, like I said, overcooking it or undercooking it. So I'd like to say thank you for joining me on this little escapade into how to fill casual, not causal vacancies.
As always, thank you for the opportunity to come and listen to your rambling and give you some back.
Nice, appreciate it. A special mention this week to Wikipedia.
And to Nick Renton.
To the late, great Nick Renton. Thanks, of course, to Jess for putting in those lovely sound effects of applause when we thanked Wikipedia and Nick Renton. I hope the bigger applause went to Nick Renton, of course. And if you're not already following us on social media, make sure you do so. Follow us on our newsletter, which you can access on our website, where we've got interesting tidbits of information. I have a sneaky suspicion there'll be a blog article about changes to committee member details coming up soon.
Yep. And that time of year.
Yes, and of course, keep those ideas coming. So it's fascinating when we get listener feedback from what people would like to hear us, I'll say talk about or unpack rather than ramble about, even though it's probably going to be a fun ramble when we get to it. So keep them coming as well. And until next time, Steve, keep up that basket casey goodness.
Thanks, Mick. See you next time.
Bye.